Utah, Texas Tech, BYU. All three in the college football playoff this year. Tosh and Jake from the Loyal Cougars podcast seem to think it's going to happen. And so do I. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. Decked out in my BYU hat, my Texas Tech sweatshirt. I'm fired up this week, and so are the guys, Jake and Tosh. Cougar board friend Sean Hammond reached out and said, why don't you have these two guys on your show and on our show? Do a little crossover action with the Loyal Cougars podcast. So it's exactly what we're doing for a very special edition of Locked On Big 12, where we answer the question, will three teams get in? Now, we talked for like an hour about a myriad of things surrounding BYU, Texas Tech, the entire conference. All of that can be found on their YouTube channel, Loyal Cougars podcast, and they're on Cougar Board. In the meantime, here's a snippet of what we got.
I think, ever since Oklahoma, Texas left, there was kind of this question mark of like, who's going to step up? And is the Big 12 going to be kind of the new Pac-12 or ACC, where they're kind of this like third tier, fourth tier P4 team? They're still P4, but they're not like getting the same respect as the ACC Big 10. And you talk about it a lot on your show, but this is a year where I think there are teams that are stepping up. And there are teams that we may have, I think, for the first year since Oklahoma and Texas left. I don't even know if it was before then, but we may have multiple teams in the college football playoff. Is that possible in your mind? Like what's the likelihood of getting? I know 2 is probably the most likely, but is it possible that we get 3?
Yeah, Jake, there's a clear scenario for 3 to me, and that starts with the Utah Utes. It has to start with the Utah Utes and their success the rest of the season. Do they get in at 10-2 without making the conference championship game? That's where things get a lot tougher. It's going to take some help at the top. That's what 3 is going to need. And there is a scenario where the ACC, I think it was a BYU fan posted it yesterday, where the ACC misses out altogether. We were talking about that this time last year of, hey, what if one of these service academies ends up sneaking in above Arizona State and the Big 12 misses it altogether based on the way that they build this college football playoff? What if the ACC gets jumped by a James Madison or a San Diego State or one of those schools and finds themselves out? In that event, the Big 12 can certainly get 3 teams in. We need some help from who could become our friends, the kind of that middle tier of the SEC, to start picking up wins against Texas. We need Oklahoma to start losing games, Texas to start losing games. We need Notre Dame to slip up down the stretch here. And more than anything, if you want 3 in, it will take Texas Tech likely beating BYU in this weekend's game by 3 points, and then BYU beating Texas Tech by 3 points in the conference championship game. I know no BYU fan wants to lose a game to Texas Tech, obviously, but if you crystal balled this and told every fan of the Cougars, hey, we're going to, I promise, we will give you a Big 12 championship guaranteed, just lose by 3 this weekend. That's tough to not take, because now you know you're going to the college football playoff, because BYU could certainly win this game against Texas Tech, and the stretch is still tough. Like, TCU is still a good football team. Cincinnati could still win that game against the Cougars. I would take a guaranteed spot in the playoff right now if given the opportunity. This 3-team scenario is going to take the Utah Utes getting to 10-2, having some luck at the top, and then BYU and Texas Tech both still being top 10 teams, where at the end of the year we look and say, hey, Utah's only 2 losses were to number 6 and number 8. Utah's only 2 losses to number 5 and to number 7. That's when things teeter in the Big 12's direction, but 2 feels very feasible right now, especially with the amount of pomp and circumstance and national respect that Texas Tech is getting.
Yeah, I think it helps too, as much as it pains me to say this, that the Utah really is propped up nationally by their 2 Rose Bowl appearances. And you see that in their preseason rankings the last couple of years. If they can be in the mix, they are probably that 3rd team that does have some history behind them, where people feel like that's a name that could belong. Yeah, I hadn't even considered 3, but 3 would be freaking awesome.
Yeah, and I think Utah is, as you guys have said, I think Utah is probably the most likely 3rd. in this scenario where, Cincinnati could potentially beat BYU, and that could be BYU's. Let's just like in a scenario where BYU probably beats Texas Tech, right? They lose to Cincinnati. Cincinnati finishes with, one loss. Is there a scenario where Cincinnati is that third? I think that's pretty unlikely, especially considering how much they got blown out by Utah. It feels like Utah would most likely be that third. But looking forward then, Drake, and this kind of goes back to and for those that haven't watched this analogy that Drake put out, I think it's brilliant, right? The Santa Claus analogy, which is if you've ever watched Tim Allen's The Santa Claus, Tim, for all intents and purposes, kills Santa Claus, right? And he becomes, because he killed Santa Claus, he becomes the next Santa Claus. And we could very well likely see that play out this week, right? Because I would actually argue that Texas Tech might still be Santa Claus, even though BYU is technically the top of the standings.
Well, Vegas sure thinks so.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So you could very well, and we'll talk about the game in just a second, but you could very well see this kind of play out where whoever wins that game is the new Santa Claus. But I think you need to establish that kind of analogy, Drake, for multiple years where, you had Alabama with Santa Claus for the longest time in the SEC. You had Ohio State for the longest time.
Clemson in the ACC. Yeah.
Clemson in the ACC. Clemson was the biggest Santa Claus, right? Out of probably all of college football. Like they took a long time for them to get dethroned, and then you had kind of the USC, Oregon, Washington, Utah. That mix was kind of the Santa Claus of the Pac-12. And ever since, Oklahoma State and Texas, I thought for a long time were the Santa Claus of the Big 12 until they left. And so now it's like, okay, now we don't really have this established team that's at the top every single year. Last year was Arizona State, right? This year it's Texas Tech and BYU and Utah. Like, I feel like, Drake, we need to establish a Santa Claus. When I say we, I mean, like, I don't know if the Big 12 can actually control this, but I feel like we need to have a Santa Claus for a few years running to kind of establish this like dominance as a conference. Because I do think that we need to get to a model. There will be a model at some point where we are kind of like the Big Ten, where it's 3 or 4 teams at the top and then everyone else pretty much every single year.
Yeah. People are saying that I'm the modern day Plato for this one. I'm getting a lot of hype around this theory, and it comes from Tim Allen's Santa Claus, that if you kill old Saint Nick, you must become him. And so a year like this year, where you could look at something like this theory playing out, would be at the beginning of the year, Iowa State beating Kansas State. Okay, now that you've knocked off arguably the number 1 team or a top contender, you then become the contender, because it does not help us if last season Kansas beats BYU. That hurts the Big 12, a non-contender. Now, we just got a very bad Santa Claus. He's not very good at delivering the toys to the kids. We need someone who can establish themselves. And when you become kind of that season ruiner, that season breaker, you've got to stay at the top of the conference, because the last thing we need is a team like West Virginia or Arizona or Oklahoma State sneaking up on top tier teams in the conference. Not to say those schools are bad or out of luck altogether. I think West Virginia still has some pomp around the program because the kids care and they want to buy in, and Arizona has plenty of talent. But the Big 12, what Brett Yormark needs is for 2-3 teams to establish themselves. He mentioned that at Big 12 Media Days. He said, look, parity's great. Stop using that word. He's like, chaos is great. Stop using those words in the Big 12. We need 2-3 schools that perennially are at the top of college football. BYU's 19-2 the last 2 years. They're not getting the respect this season that maybe an Indiana is getting. When Indiana was good last year, we used that context for them to be good once again this year and get plenty of respect. BYU should certainly have that. Texas Tech should have that. And honestly, again, we mentioned brands. I think Utah is that third school that deserves to be in the Santa, the old St. Nick conversation, because Cincinnati and Houston aren't going to get the same respect from the college football playoff committee of brands like Utah, Texas Tech, and BYU. Those should be and could be your 3 schools right now, the next 3 to 5 years that the Big 12 leans on, unless Arizona State revives and becomes consistent, wins the league next year. And then you're starting to finally find, okay, there's really a straight line or a growing line of success from a TCU and Arizona State, maybe a Kansas State, to say, okay, wow, okay, they are a contender every year. But right now it's BYU, Texas Tech, Utah, and then I think there's the gap past that.
Yeah, and Texas Tech and BYU especially have got reinvigorated donors. They've got great teams coming back. I could see those 2 teams being the face of the Big 12 for the next several years, as long as the money keeps flowing and the wins keep stacking, which I don't know why they wouldn't. Utah, yes, historically, but, and this is not even just BYU fan talking, Kyle Whittingham leaving does give a big question mark there. And any true Utah fan also realizes that for whatever reason, they don't have the donors right now. And so that's where, I don't know how much legs the Utah one does, but Texas Tech and BYU for sure.
Yeah.
We'll stop it right there. Just a little teaser. The rest of that on the Loyal Cougars podcast. Go and find it at Loyal Cougars podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.